Let's open in prayer and we'll get started. Our Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for this day, this exciting day that we get to move down to the gym and have really a Feast of Tabernacles, as it were, for a few weeks. We thank you for this opportunity for us to learn about some of the history and the way your prophecies fulfilled themselves, or that you fulfilled those prophecies in history. We pray that you would help us to learn something that we can apply to our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, let me start by saying, if there's a fire alarm, feel free to evacuate. I think Tom's going to address it when the church is together. In my defense, I did not realize it was a fire alarm. I thought it was a security breach, and I could see the policeman through the door, and he looked calm and everything. So I was like, well, I don't want to send you out there into an active shooting situation anyway, so we'll just keep on until he tells us what to do. And afterwards, apparently, it said fire behind me, and I didn't even see that on those little things. But we will have a fire protocol in place when we move back. The nursery workers did exactly the right thing. They evacuated. So if you are a parent and the fire alarm goes off, don't go look for your kid. Your kid will be outside. Okay. Anyway. I wonder if the temple in Jerusalem had a fire protocol. Transitioning to our topic today is going to end in what Christ was the fire protocol. That's right. Okay. Well, let me read for you from Mark chapter 13. And as he, Jesus, came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." And Jesus said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? They will not be left here, one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." That is a really interesting statement. The temple in Jesus' day, which we call the Second Temple, remember there was Solomon's temple, destroyed in 586 BC. The rebuilding started 70 years later, as per Jeremiah's prophecy, that resulted under Zerubbabel, and then Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, that kind of crowd. They had the Second Temple, which was enlarged greatly by Herod the Great, the one that ended up killing the babies. But he was known for building the Temple Mount, and it was spectacular. The stones that built the temple were the size of this room, some of them. I mean, just massive, massive, massive stones. And so you can imagine the disciples it's like it's exactly the way I was when I went to Washington, D.C. for the first time. And every time I've been there, it's like you just walk around, you're like, wow. I mean, everything is so beautiful, and all the monuments are just the stones that they chose, and just the way it's laid out. And you're just like, look at these things, and you kind of bask in it. That's what it would have been like, but times 1,000, coming out of the temple, looking around and just being like, look at these amazing stones, look at this amazing building. And you expect Jesus to say, that's right, aren't humans so great that we can build these things? And instead he says, yeah, you see these stones? There won't be one left on another at some point. Quite a downer. What did Jesus know? Well, there's a theological reality that Jesus came to fulfill the whole Old Testament, all the prophecies, all of the prophecies were shadows. He was the substance. And so one of the things he would fulfill is the temple. He called his body the temple. And when he left, the Spirit came and indwelt us, and we became the temple. The church is now the temple. So there would be no need for a physical structure. And so the temple was part of God's plan, was to wipe the temple off the face of the earth once the church came to become the temple. And that's exactly what happened. And so what we're going to talk about is how that played out in history. Now, just to remind you where we are in our intertestamental period, the 400 years before Christ, we've kind of moved through those things, the Persian period, the Hellenistic period, and then the Roman period. And we got as far as the Maccabean revolt, where they revolted against the Seleucid dynasty under the Hellenistic period. And why is it called Hellenist again? What does Hellenist mean? Greek, yeah, because Greece calls itself Helena. And so to Greekify something is to Hellenize it. So that's why everyone spoke Greek. That's why we have the Septuagint, the Greek translation. That now we kind of find ourselves moving past the intertestamental period. So there's 1 AD / 1 BC, and now we're moving this way. So Jesus, born, I know I burst your bubble a little, but Jesus was not born in 1 AD. Jesus was actually born at probably 5 AD, BC, because Herod the Great dies in 4 BC. So when they built the calendar, they tried to make it right, but they miscalculated it a little bit, and we're just kind of stuck with it. And so unless the whole world decides to set their clocks back to 2020, yeah, no one wants to do that. But if the whole world decided to go back to 2020, we'd be on schedule. But let's not. Let's just stick where we're done with 2020. So Jesus lives for 33 years. So we're just going to go with the timeline the way it is. So I always talk about Jesus' death in 33 AD. Technically, it was 28 AD. But we're just going to go with that. Okay, so when Jesus dies, he rises 3 days later. He ascends into heaven in Acts chapter 1. And remember, the Jews say to him, is now the time you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? They still didn't get it. Why were they looking for a political Messiah to get rid of the Romans? Remember, that's the sentiment that came from the Maccabean revolt, is that, wait a minute, we can have our own independent state. We took it from the Seleucids, and then the Romans came in and dominated us, and now we want it back. So in 63 BC, Pompey, he's a general, Roman general, he comes and he conquers that area, and he takes over, for Rome, he takes over Israel. They put in their own king, King Herod. Herod's dynasty carries on, but Rome is really ruling. So that's from 63 AD. And remember, I told you the Maccabean family, the Hasmonean family, they actually reached out to Rome. Rome was the ones that legitimized them as an independent Jewish state. So there was an invitation for Rome to come and help. Rome seemed like the good guys compared to the Greeks that had at that point been the bad guys. But over time, what they realized is the Romans, the good part of being under Roman rule is that they let them worship as Jews. The bad part under Roman rule is that they really like to raise taxes. And they moved into a system where instead of having Roman prefects in charge of a certain region, which was more of like a military type of presence, they had procurators, which were political, civil tax-raising offices. And so Pontius Pilate is a procurator, for example. And so these procurators, the way they had to do it is they were responsible for raising a certain amount of tax from a region based on its population. How did they figure out the population? Same way we do, through a census. Remember, that's exactly why Mary and Joseph went to Bethlehem. It's very important for the Romans to know where everyone was so that we knew how much money we needed to get from you. And so you can imagine that the richer places with the higher populations, those procurators were raising a ton of money for Rome. But the rule was that if you raised anything more than that, you could keep it. And they used Jewish tax collectors to go get the taxes, and they told the Jewish tax collectors, anything you get more than what I want, my cut, you can keep. So everyone is getting highly taxed and highly exploited. The tax collectors are getting rich. The procurators are getting rich. Now, some of the procurators were very good rulers, and some of them were really bad. And part of the reason we have what's called the First Jewish-Roman War is because of one very bad procurator by the name of Gessius Flores. So what happens is you've got this anti-Roman sentiment that is just brewing among the people. They want a Messiah. They want to be free. Jesus comes and says, I'm the Messiah, and everyone's like, yes, the Son of David, he's here. And then they realize, oh, you mean just spiritually? No. We don't want you. Give us Barabbas. Because Barabbas was an insurrectionist. He was somebody who was actually trying to overthrow the government. That's what we're looking for. And now there's this anti-Roman mindset, and the Romans allowed Jews to be Jewish, but the one thing the Romans didn't like is that the Jews were monotheistic. They were like the only group that insisted that there's only one God. And so there was this tension. So this is happening all over the country, and it's just going on and on and on. They're still waiting for their Messiah. They're waiting for Rome to be overthrown. And in 67, 65 AD. So 63 BC, Rome comes in under Pompey. 65 AD, there's this incident. So there's a growing anti-Roman sentiment. Now, some of the Gentile citizens, Roman, Greek citizens of a town called Caesarea Maritima. Caesarea Maritima is a very beautiful town. You can go to the ruins today. I've been there. They're absolutely stunning. Just a massive town that Herod had built as kind of a holiday resort on the beach, and it's still to this day very, very beautiful with these massive, massive buildings. And Gessius Florus was the procurator, and that's where he lived. So he had a really cushy spot in the Roman Empire, and he got greedy. And while he is raising taxes, something started to happen where people turned against the Jews. And these Gentiles had a building right next to a Jewish synagogue. And synagogue is like a place where Jews would go to worship weekly if they lived far from the temple. And they wanted to expand their building and get rid of the synagogue, and the synagogue wouldn't sell to them. And they kept offering them money. We want to buy your project, your building, because we want to expand our building. And the synagogue said, no, this is our building. So they started building anyway. And they built right up to in front of the entrance. I mean, imagine that. Imagine, there was a mosque next door, and they built their entrance right into our parking lot. That's what was going on. There was this tension. And the Jews were appealing to Gessius Florus to do something about this, and he just ignored the problem. So then the next step was they were trying to chase them out, so that they actually did a sacrifice of birds called an augury. What they do is cut open birds and spill the guts, and then the gods would communicate that way. It's weird, but it's a thing. The Romans did that, and they did it on the stairs of the synagogue one day to defile the synagogue. And the Jews were so upset about this that they decided to go and beg Gessius Florus to fix the problem and kind of wet his beak a little, bring a bribe, a gift, a civil fee, shall we say, that amounted to the equivalent of $2 million. So it was 8 talents of silver. So they bring this massive gift / bribe to Gessius Florus to simply do what he was supposed to do, and that's keep the peace. And this was illegal for what these Gentiles were doing. And instead of just taking the money and going to the Gentiles and saying, hey, back off, he took the money and said no, and arrested those people. So this was like, this is crazy. We pay the bribe, you take the bribe, you don't even do what we bribe you for. And so there was massive unrest there. And so the place was a powder keg. The whole nation was against Rome. Now this Roman guy is doing this thing, and it's spreading. The knowledge of this is spreading all over. And Gessius Florus being, sometimes political leaders are just this dumb. He chooses that moment in time to say, well, you guys have not been paying enough taxes. I'm going to get those back taxes from you by raiding the temple in Jerusalem. So everyone hates this guy. And he sends his troops and he goes to Jerusalem to go and get the treasury. The Jews were extremely, they send all their wealth to the temple, and they always made their building, the temple, look beautiful, and it was always filled with gold and silver and all these things. And so remember, they offered him 8 talents, $2 million, which he took. Then he went and got another 17 talents from the temple. So he's just making tens of millions of dollars here. And when he came in with his soldiers to do this, the young men in the city, kind of the protesting vibe, the students, as it were, they started mocking him by taking a collection in the streets, passing around baskets, asking for copper coins, because the poor procurator, he's so impoverished, he needs so much money. And so they started this little peaceful revolt by raising money. Do you have any spare change for the poor procurator? I mean, look at him. He's desperate for money. He's here raiding our temple. And this caught on, and it became this big satirical, funny thing. And when he got word of it, he flipped out. His ego could not handle this, and he told his soldiers to go into people's houses and kill these people with the little baskets. And the soldiers kind of just wiped out a whole bunch of people, 3,600 Jews. So think about that. 3,600 Jews died in one day because of his ego. So the people rise up against him and his soldiers, and they start attacking the soldiers, and they're throwing things off the roof at the soldiers. And so Gessius Florus hightails it out of there, and he. So this riot starts. He appeals for help, and a general comes from Rome. Nero is the emperor at this point. Nero sends a guy called Cestius Gallus. So Cestius Gallus comes down to come and quash this rebellion. And he goes to Jerusalem with just a few people. I think it was, I don't remember, not a massive force. At that stage, let me think. It is actually important. How many troops did he have? I don't know. He goes there with a few thousand soldiers, and he goes to Jerusalem with these few thousand soldiers. On the way down, every village they get to, they crush the little rebellions there, and they burn the villages if there's any resistance. If the people back off, then they let them live. If they don't, they attack. And he's perfectly victorious all the way down through Israel till he gets to Jerusalem, and the uprising in Jerusalem is too much for the number of soldiers that he brought. Remember, Jerusalem's a very populous area. Some estimates put it at 1 million people at a time in Jerusalem. Even more than that sometimes. So he realizes all of the residents are against him and his men. So he goes and camps and to decide what to do and get reinforcements. And he camps in a little place, little valley, little cute valley, like picture Yosemite, just a wonderful little spot called the Beth Horon Pass. Now I want you to remember last week what happened at the Beth Horon Pass. Does anyone remember? Yeah. It's a very, very narrow path. And so as the people were coming in, the Romans funneled down to just a few people, and that's how the Maccabean guerrilla warfare, the guys in the hill, were able to take on a Roman legion and wipe them all out. And remember, Judas Maccabeus got, I think it was Lysias's sword. Well, the same thing happens here. They attack these soldiers in the Beth Horon Valley, and they capture the aquila, it's called, like a staff that has an eagle on it that represents Rome. And the Jews capture this. And in this, they kill so many of these soldiers. They were camping and then they left, and then they came back fleeing from a battle through there. And when they got to the narrow part, that's when the Jews attacked them. And they end up killing 6,000 soldiers, which is a Roman legion. So it's very similar to what happened in the Maccabean revolt. The legion that was wiped out was called Legion 12, which was the Florensis Legion. It was a very noble and decorated and powerful legion, and it was completely wiped out. So this is huge. So this news gets back to Nero, and now everyone is freaking out, because now the Jews, not only were they able to chase out Gessius Florus, they were able to chase out Cestius Gallus as well. They wipe out his legion. This little quashing the rebellion isn't working. So Nero sends his best general, the general that was in charge of the campaign in Britannia, that kind of took over England. His name was Titus Flavius Vespasian. So he becomes known as General Vespasian. He is 58 years old at this point. He has a grown son, Titus, who's also a general, and they work together. So Titus goes down to Egypt and gets a bunch of soldiers, and Vespasian comes from the north and with a whole bunch of soldiers, and they arrive with like 60,000 soldiers, a third of the Roman army. And as they're coming through, they just burn everything. They just kill and pillage and burn everything and everyone. They kill thousands and thousands of Jews wherever they go. They're just killing Jews. By the end of all of this, a third of the Jewish population is dead. So this is a massacre. And they come to Jerusalem, and they surround Jerusalem. They build a wall around Jerusalem, and they let Jews in, but they don't let them out. Why would they let them in? Well, they want more and more people in there to eat the food reserves, because this is going to be a siege. So this is now happening in 69 AD that Vespasian has encircled, 68, 69. So they're just waiting for the Jews to run out of food and water. In a brilliant piece of psychological warfare, though, Eleazar, who's the high priest in charge, has all of the people go and dump their water over the walls and wet the walls to make the Romans think that they have a water source inside. But they didn't. So they're actually just wasting that water. The other thing that happened is there was a massive infighting going on inside the city among the Jews, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Remember them? They don't like each other. There's a group called the Zealots as well. So the Sadducees, the political group, they're like, we're never going to beat Rome. What are we thinking here? Like, let's just make peace with them. Let's negotiate. Let's surrender in such a way that all we want from them, they can have a Roman procurator ruling us. We don't care. We don't want to be independent of Rome. We just want to be able to be Jewish. Just let us do our thing and we'll pay our taxes. That was, the Sadducees wanted that. The Zealots, which was another group, they said, nah, we want to be independent again like we were under the Maccabees. So we want to kill the Romans or die trying. So there was this fight in between. And in order to get force the Sadducees' hand, the Zealots burnt the food reserves. Yeah, terrorists. So they're self-sabotaging. So they start killing each other. The Zealots are killing the Sadducees that don't like them. They're burning the food reserves. Titus and his dad Vespasian, they know about this, so they're just waiting. And Vespasian has a famous quote where he says, why risk a Roman life when the Jews are killing each other for us? So they just kind of wait there while the Jews are literally killing each other in this infighting, burning their own food reserves, throwing their water over the ramparts, and you're like, what is going on here? And very soon the city is so weakened and the people are so starved and they're so famished and thirsty that they're just in absolute dire straits. And when that happens, news comes that Nero has died. Now, just a little aside. One of the people that was captured on the way down was a young man called Josephus. He had a Jewish name, Joseph something, but he ends up being called by his Roman name, Josephus. Josephus is the one that records all of this for us. So the reason we know all of this is because he has three main books: Life, which is his biography, the Antiquity of the Jews, which gives us the history of the Jews from Genesis, and then he has the Jewish Wars, which talks about this in great detail. So remember, it's one man's testimony, and he's a little bit biased because he's Jewish, but he's got to keep the Romans happy. So he keeps showing how valiant the Jews were, but how it wasn't really the Romans' fault that this happened. This was a judgment from God. So that's how he writes his history. And he is a commander of a fortress in Galilee, and he gets taken captive. And when everyone else was being executed, and it came time to execute him, he steps forward and tells the person about to execute him, I have a prophecy from God for Vespasian. So the Romans are like super superstitious. So he takes him in and he tells Vespasian, God told me that you're going to be the next emperor. So don't just kill me, just keep me as a slave and see how this plays out. Which is just a complete gamble because obviously God did not tell him that. Vespasian had no plans to be emperor at all. He didn't want to be. He didn't know any. I mean, he's 58 years old. That's twice the age of Nero. He would be the oldest emperor in history. He's a general. That hadn't happened before. I mean, it's just but he's like, okay, let's see. So he takes Josephus captive, and that's how Josephus survived that time. Josephus is a pretty smart guy. You'll see this happens again later. So then Vespasian finds out that Nero's dead, and he's got this little prophecy in his head. It's kind of like Macbeth, when the witches tell him, you're going to be king, and he starts thinking, how can I become king then? And so he decides, instead of attacking Jerusalem, he's going to go to Rome. Now, during this time, 69 AD, it's called the Year of the Four Emperors, because after Nero died, there was 4 successive emperors in 1 year. They just came and went, killing each other. And when the dust settles, Vespasian shows up in Rome, declares himself emperor, and all of the soldiers back him up because he's a war hero. And they're like, yeah, we want him to be our commander-in-chief, not somebody who's never served in uniform. And there's echoes of that even in politics today. So Vespasian becomes emperor and tells Titus, I did it. So just wipe out Jerusalem and come. So Titus does that. They finally break through the walls. The people, there's not much resistance at this point. The people are all, dying of starvation. And he comes in, and when he comes in with all of his soldiers thinking it's going to be easy to just take over the city, the people kind of get revived, and they all fight to the death to defend the temple. And they have, some of them don't even have weapons. They just put their bodies, you just have to hack your way through these people to get to the temple, and there's just more and more people coming with their fists and Roman soldiers, and it's a total massacre. 1.1 million people die. 1.1 million people. Now again, that's Josephus's estimate. Historians say that that's exaggerated, but still the point is millions and millions of people die. Josephus said that the blood was running in the streets up to the reins of the horses. So in this milieu, this fight, the temple catches fire. Now there's a big debate. According to Josephus, Titus told his soldiers, don't destroy the temple, because the temple was just such a magnificent thing. It was just like, well, let's at least keep it. But they destroyed the temple anyway. Other historians think, no, that's just Josephus saying that to try to keep the peace a little bit. But of course, they destroyed the temple. When the temple sets on fire, the gold melts. And they said that the gold was running in the crevices of the rocks, and the Romans just pillaged everything. And they just destroyed everything, and they knocked every stone off every other stone. And with battering rams and with catapults, and they just flattened the whole temple. Just remember what Jesus said? Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. And you can go to Jerusalem today and see those ruins. They're there. And these big rocks, and you can climb on them and clamber. These are the actual stones, the actual rocks that were broken into pieces and tossed in a landfill. Now, that's the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Since then, the temple has never ever been rebuilt. Judaism cannot function without a temple because you have to make sacrifices for sins. You can only make sacrifices in the temple. There is no temple. There's no sacrifice, which is why after they rebuilt the Western Wall on the Temple Mount with the same stones that had fallen over, that wall is still there now. So you can go right up to that wall. It's called the Wailing Wall. I'm sure you've seen pictures of it. And every Shabbat, every Friday night, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Jews come to that wall and just lean against it and just cry that they can't sacrifice for their sins. And if you ask them, well, what do you do with your sins in the meantime? They just say, well, God knows there's nothing we can do, so he needs to make a way to forgive our sins other than the sacrifice. And what they miss is that that's exactly what happened. That's why God allowed the temple to be wiped out, because he's trying to tell people, well, he was telling people, there is no more physical temple. You only come to me through Jesus Christ. Now, one thing I didn't tell you is about the massacre at Masada. Right when this started happening, a bunch of Sicarii, about 900 of them, Sicarii were a splinter group of the Zealots. Sicarii means dagger men, and they were assassins. They used to kill Romans by walking up to them in big crowds and just sticking them with a knife and running away, and they were terrorists. And they escaped to Masada when they saw all this going down. Masada was populated by about 600 Romans. Doesn't matter. They just went up and wiped them out. So Masada is a huge fortress that is 140 meters high on the one side, 80 meters high on the other side because of the valleys. And Herod had a palace up there. And it just makes for a great fortification. They've got these huge walls. There's only one real way that you can come in, and that's through what's called the Serpentine pathway. You can walk it today. I've walked it. You have to leave at 5:30 in the morning because it gets so hot, and it just zigzags up, a couple of miles until you get up in the mountains, and you're just dead tired. And so that's how you have to attack this place. So the Jews did it stealthily because the Romans weren't expecting anything. It was right at the beginning of the rebellion. But now that if you're waiting for someone to attack you, they can't attack you. You're safe. So you have to just wait it out till everyone dies of starvation and thirst. But it is so well fortified and provided for. They have cisterns underground there that has enough water for 16 Olympic swimming pools. So if you're rationing your water and whenever it rains, you fill it up again or whatever. You could live there. 900 people could live up there indefinitely. They had massive food reserves as well, and they were growing food up there. So they would just hunker down and like, this is the last stand. So after all the other Jews and 1 million people and a third of the population died, there were just these 900 left with this attitude of like, no, we're never giving in to Rome. And so rather than just leave them there, Titus said, we got to go get them. And so they went, and that's why the first Jewish war doesn't go from 66 AD to 70 AD. It goes to 73 AD. Why? Because there's these last 900 people for the last 3 years. And they're up there, and the Romans come and build a wall all the way around Masada. That's just textbook. It's just what they do. And those ruins are still there. You can see that. And what's interesting about Masada is, let's just do it here. Let's say here's the mountain. Here's Masada. Can everybody kind of see that? This is the steep serpentine path that you can't really use to attack because they're just going to kill you as you're coming up there. So what the Romans did is they had 6,000 soldiers and slaves day and night take buckets of dirt and toss it in here. They just tossed in this dirt for years. And slowly, slowly, this mountain gets filled in. Slowly, slowly. I mean, it takes months and months and months. They build a ramp. The ramp's obviously still there today. They build a ramp like that so that they can now just attack normally, almost. I mean, if you go to Masada, you always say, well, why didn't they just come up the ramp? And no, they did. But so this isn't such a safe place after all. Well, it was until they built that ramp with buckets of sand. I mean, just they say there's enough dirt in there to build 1.5 Empire State Buildings in this valley, and that's how the Romans came in. So when they're coming in, they expect to have this fierce battle against these 900 Sicarii. But what happened is the Sicarii, rather than be taken captive by the Romans or slaughtered by the Romans, they killed themselves. But because suicide is a sin under Judaism, they devised a system where they would draw lots, and everyone kills the next person up until, each man kills his family. And when all the families are dead, the men get together, and then one kills 5 at a time. So I don't get this either, because murder is also sin, but for some reason, and then only the last person has to commit suicide, and only he gets punished, but he kind of carries that for everyone else. So that was the idea. So when they come in, there's 972 dead bodies. And the only people that escaped to tell what happened were a few young ladies and children that hid in the cisterns from their own families trying to kill them. And so they survived. Now, this was the second time that had happened. The first time this happened was when Josephus gets captured. I didn't tell you this part. This is fun. So, it's macabre, but it's interesting. Josephus, the way he gets captured is, same thing. The Romans are coming, they're fortified, they all decide to kill themselves, and Josephus comes up with this plan. Let's rather all kill ourselves. We'll kill each other until the last one standing kills himself. Same thing as Masada. And he says, let's devise a formula to figure out who does this. And he devises a formula kind of like a, eeny, meeny, miny, mo kind of thing, like where he ends up being the one that's left over. And so they all kill each other until it works out that there's 2 left. And he says, rather than us kill each other, let's just surrender. And the other guy's like, okay. I mean, he's just seen all these other people die. He's like, yeah, let's do it. So that's how Josephus saved himself the first time. So he's kind of like a sneaky dude, you got to factor that in when he's writing this whole history, and he's a sneaky dude. Anyway, so but that's what happens with Masada. They take Masada, it's official, that ends the war. That's in 73 AD. To this day, everyone in Israel has to serve in the military, unless you're from the Orthodox and you go to yeshiva instead, which means you train to be you go to Bible school instead of the army. Everyone else goes to the army. Every young lady comes out of high school and goes for 9 months, and every guy comes out of high school and goes for 3 years, everyone. And then for the rest of your life, you go back for training every, I think it's once a year. And so everyone is always battle ready. They're always armed. If you go to the beach, you see there's one 19-year-old standing guard of a pile of rifles while the others swim, and they take turns. You go to a nightclub, and there's girls in their miniskirts with their rifles, because if you lose your rifle, you go to jail for 7 years. So, it's really fascinating. You just see all of these teenagers walking around with machine guns, basically, and all of them can kill you with their bare hands anyway. So it's actually a very safe place to go and visit because of that. Anyway, on your first day, at your graduation ceremony after basic training, where you come into the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, and you get your uniform and all that, and you're officially a soldier, you hike up to Masada with your whole class, and you stand on Masada, and there's a echo, I don't know what you call it, like echo chamber or something. You walk right up to the edge, and we did this, and we shouted, whatever you shout comes back at you a few seconds later. And we got a whole bunch of guys together and just shouted with our deepest voices. I can't even remember what we shouted. Is Will here today? No, he's not. He was part of that, Will Phillips. And we shouted, it's like, "Whoa!" And then you wait, and it comes back, "Whoa!" Even louder, and you're like, whoa, that was cool, let's do it again. And that's what they do, and they chant this saying, Masada will never fall again. That's what they chant. That's their kind of pledge of allegiance to their vow that Masada will never fall again. Right back to 73 AD. To this day, every time there's a class, that's where they go. That's where they get their stripes. That's what they declare. So it's very much part of the Jewish culture, the story I just told, and it's the one thing that's kind of this unresolved note is, when does the temple get rebuilt? So that's what I have for you on 70 AD. You can see why it's such a monumental moment in Jewish history, and that's why some Christians today still think of the whole book of Revelation, speaking about all the tribulation and destruction that happens to the earth, as a metaphorical picture, a symbolic picture of what actually happened in 70 AD, because it was such a tragic event. Good, we have 10 minutes for questions. Yes, Kathy.
How does what's happening today, the anti-Semitic, fit into this?
Today's anti-Semitism, how does it fit in? So for those who might be watching this many years from now, we are in 2024, which is right during the war between Israel and Hamas. Now, Hamas is not a country, it is a terrorist group within a country. So usually countries go to war with each other, but this is a terrorist group. So that's what's causing the conflict at the moment, is that who do you retaliate against? It's kind of like when Al-Qaeda hit the Twin Towers, who do you go fight? They're not a country. And so that was the first time there was this declaration of the war against terrorism. And any country that supports them now becomes an enemy. But there isn't really a country that did it. That's the same kind of thing that's happening now with Israel, is Hamas attacks, but it's not Palestine that attacked, it's just this group within them. But who do you attack? Well, you got to attack the people that support them, and the people from whom they come, which, well, that's Palestine. So now you've got Israel, that's a country that's kind of divided in half, Palestine and Israel, and there's this tension, sort of the Roman-Jewish tension. I mean, think about it, from the Jews' point of view, this was our land all along. It was this destruction in 70 AD that caused the diaspora, that sent the Jews out of the land for the second time since the exile. And they were out of the land expecting to come back, 70 years later, and instead it was 1900 years later. So after World War II in 1948, the League of Nations just says, well, the Jews can come back, they can have their land back. Well, what's happened in the 1900 years since they left? The Palestinians took over. So the Palestinians are like, maybe this was your land before, maybe not. That's not the point. We've been here 1948 years. This is our land, obviously. I mean, just think of where America was 1900 years ago. America's what, it's nearly 300 years old, not even. So there's that. So because of that tension, the Palestinians are, this is our land. The Jews are like, no, it was ours before, and it's ours legally. And of course, the Jews are more powerful. So when Hamas, they don't like this, what are you going to do? They're like the Sicarii. So they're attacking Israel, and Israel's like, well, what are you going to do? We need to destroy you. And anyone who wants to leave can leave, and anyone who stays is a bad guy. So that's why all the students are protesting at the moment, because they're like, the poor Palestinians, they've got nothing, they can't help themselves. Well, they have a point. On the other hand, the Israelis are like, well, if they just stopped killing our people, taking us hostage and bombing us, we wouldn't have this war. So it's kind of a very, very complicated situation. And I think it's always wiser to just rather stay out of that debate as much as possible. For some reason, Americans more than other nations get very riled up, and now you've got protests and people going to jail over free the Palestinians. It's like, why do you have a dog in this fight? Just step back. Like, let the Palestinians do what they do. Let the Jews do what the Israelis do what they do, and let the people whose job it is try to figure this out. And you just go to chemistry class. It's above our pay grade. So I know that's not really what your question was, but the way that it fits into this is just that this event started the diaspora. The diaspora is the scattering of the Jews where they have no homeland, that led to the Palestinians occupying it for nearly 2 millennia, that then, once Israel was given their land back just by decision, not by the Palestinians' decision, but the League of Nations, that's now caused this tension that'll never go away. I mean, it would never go away. So there's that. Good question. Now we only have 6 minutes left. Yes, Kim.
What percentage of the population died in all these wars? How many people went to the diaspora? I feel like there's nobody left.
You mean since 70 AD? How many people have died since then? What are you asking?
All the wars, you're making it sound like everybody died, but there's a diaspora.
So a third of the population died during this. So I mean, and that's just this war. There's another one, the Bar Kokhba revolution, which happens 65 years later. Everyone thinks, well, the last exile was 70 years. The next one's going to be 70 years. The temple's going to be rebuilt in 70 AD. So in 135 AD, there's an uprising. There's a guy called, I've blanked. Well, he ends up being called Bar Kokhba. His name is Ben Kosiba, and Simon Ben Kosiba. And there's a very influential rabbi, Rabbi Akiva, who says, this is the Messiah. And he changes his name from Kosiba because it sounds like Kokhba. And Kokhba means star, son of the star, which is in Numbers 24 is the phrase Balaam uses to prophesy of a Messiah coming. So, hey, we've got the star from Numbers 24, Bar Kokhba. And so he's a very charismatic leader, and he starts a rebellion against Rome, and it plays very much like the one we just heard. And this time it's under Hadrian, and Hadrian comes and absolutely wipes out as many Jews as he possibly can. He destroys Jerusalem to the ground and rebuilds an entire new city called Capitolina Iolia, which just means, a new capital. And it's no longer Jerusalem, it's no longer the capital of the Jews, it's now a Roman capital. And he builds a temple to Jupiter where the old temple used to be, and he's like, Jews are now done. There are no more Jews in Jerusalem. And from that moment on, the Jews don't live there anymore. They move all over. They go to Poland, they go to Russia, they come to the States once there's a States to come to, and that's the diaspora. And then you have World War II, and then you have the regathering. So that's kind of the history of the Jews. Yes, Brian.
What about the Christians that were in Jerusalem? We know that there's a church there. What happened to them during that?
Yeah, I mean, the Christians were treated more severely even than the Jews, because they had Jewish persecution as well as the Roman persecution. So during the 70 AD massacre, because of Nero's persecution, the Christians had fled already. So they weren't really as much, from what I understand, this is not something I've researched, but just remembering from church history, the persecution, like we're reading about First Peter writing to the Jews that have been spread. Peter's in Rome. There's a lot. So the Christians have already started spreading from the stoning of Stephen in Book of Acts, Acts 7. There's this spread of Christianity. So they would have been treated like the Jews probably as well. I mean, the Romans considered the Christians and the Jews the same religion. You're a Jew that thinks he's the Messiah. You're a Jew who thinks that the Messiah is still coming. You're all Jews. You all die. Jerusalem was a very persecuted church. It was a very poor church, which is why the other churches are always taking offerings in the New Testament for the church in Jerusalem. It was the bare bones, the skeleton crew stayed in Jerusalem. Everyone else spread. Good. One more question? Yes, Josh.
Should we see the destruction of the temple as fulfillment of the course?
Yes.
What you said after talking about the destruction?
Good question. Is this 70 AD a fulfillment of the Olivet Discourse? And I checked this with Will Brannon because he just did his doctoral project on this very issue, and we agree it's a foreshadowing. You see lots of prophecies in Scripture where there's a near fulfillment, far fulfillment, and so this would be the near fulfillment. So that is certainly the destruction of the temple is what Jesus was talking about when he says, one stone will not be laid on another. The next thing that happens is the disciples say, tell us when this is going to happen. And then Jesus starts describing a kind of what'll come, what'll come in the future. And some of it is 70 AD, and then I believe some of it isn't. And so Jesus talks about that prophecy as if it's one, just like many of the prophets throughout. I mean, even the prophecy of the virgin birth was about a woman at that time, Isaiah's wife, and how she was going to give birth, and she was a young woman, but that word Alma is a pun on young woman and a virgin, and later on it gets picked up, oh, there's this other fulfillment that's even greater. So that happens a lot in prophecy, and I think that's what's happening with 70 AD. That was the first fulfillment, but there'll be another fulfillment of another tribulation that comes when there's another temple that'll be destroyed, and that happens, I believe, in the tribulation period, in the end time. Very good. Well, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this intertestamental and a little bit beyond class. And if you have more questions, you can talk about it on Wednesday.